Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material. So I want you to just imagine for a second that you're staring across this violently flooded river.
Oh, yeah. Like a really dangerous current.
Exactly. And right on the other side is this heavily fortified, totally intimidating ancient city. You know for a fact that you have to conquer it. The survival of, hundreds of thousands of people depends entirely on whatever your next move is.
That is a lot of pressure.
Right. And the really wild part is the only battle plan you've actually been given is to, read a book, stand perfectly still, and then willingly get your feet wet in this raging flood.
Yeah, it sounds completely absurd from a tactical standpoint.
It totally does.
Yeah.
But that is the exact scenario we are stepping into today. We are doing a deep dive into the source material of the first 5 chapters of the book of Joshua. And, yes, it's an ancient text, but fundamentally, it is this absolute masterclass in navigating massive life transitions.
Absolutely.
It's about facing down these seemingly impossible obstacles and cultivating this radical, almost physics-defying kind of faith. We're essentially looking for the blueprint on how to handle the terrifying thresholds in our own lives right now.
Yeah, and it is a phenomenal blueprint. But to really grasp the sheer weight of what happens in these first few chapters, we kind of have to ground ourselves in the historical and human reality of this exact moment.
The context, eh?
Right. So put yourself in the shoes of the Israelites. They have been this wandering nomadic people for 40 long years, just trapped in a harsh, unforgiving wilderness.
40 years is a lifetime.
Literally. An entire generation has physically died out in that desert. And now the most devastating blow has just landed. Their legendary leader, Moses, has died.
Wow.
When you think about who Moses was to these people, this is the guy who stared down the Pharaoh of Egypt, the man who literally raised his staff and split the Red Sea. He disappeared into a blazing mountain and brought down the very law that organized their entire society.
He was everything to them.
Exactly. He was their mediator, their father figure, their absolute North Star. And suddenly, he is just gone.
The psychological whiplash of that must have been just staggering. It's really hard to even find a modern equivalent for it. It's not just like a legendary CEO retiring or a beloved politician stepping down.
Right, it's much deeper than that.
It's more like, okay, imagine being on a massive ship in the middle of a catastrophic hurricane, and you literally watch your brilliant, seasoned captain get swept overboard into the dark water. And as you are standing there, freezing and absolutely terrified, someone just shoves the wheel into your hands and says, "You're in charge now. Get us to shore."
That is a perfect analogy. That is Joshua's exact reality.
He is staring at this new, incredibly intimidating territory of Canaan. And the Jordan River is sitting right in front of them, acting as this profound psychological and spiritual threshold. Everything they have ever known, the trauma of Egypt, the desert, Moses, all of it is behind them.
Yeah, the past is totally cut off.
And this overwhelming, fortified, heavily armed unknown is just staring right back at them across the water.
And that brutal reality is what makes the very first verse of the book of Joshua hit with such incredible force. The text says that God speaks directly to Joshua, and the very first thing he says is this blunt, inescapable reality check. He says, "Moses, my servant, is dead."
Just right to the point. No padding.
None at all. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no period of extended mourning offered here. The era of Moses is definitively, permanently over. And the command that follows immediately after that is, "Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan thou and all this people."
Moses, my servant, is dead. Now arise. It's breathtakingly unsentimental, honestly.
It forces Joshua out of any paralysis he might be feeling. Right?
Exactly. But God doesn't just, hand him this terrifying burden and walk away. He pairs it with this repeated mandate that just echoes throughout the entire first chapter. He tells Joshua over and over, be strong and of a good courage.
Yeah, it's a huge theme.
And he backs it up with this unbelievable geographical promise. God essentially says, every place the sole of your foot treads is yours, from Lebanon all the way to the great river Euphrates. It's basically a blank check of territorial victory.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right. Yeah. But here is where the text completely subverts our expectations, and honestly, where I find myself stuck on the strategy of it all. Joshua is a general, right? He is about to launch an unprecedented, massive military invasion.
A huge campaign.
He knows there are walled cities ahead. He knows there are fortified enemies who have been preparing for this for decades. Yet when God gives him his primary marching orders, The instruction has absolutely nothing to do with troop formations.
Nope, not a single tactical word.
Nothing about supply chains or forging bronze weapons or building siege engines. The cool instruction is to meditate on the book of the law day and night. Why? Like if you are sending a commander into a brutal war, why give him a theology book instead of a battle plan?
I know it seems entirely counterintuitive to the modern pragmatic mind, but the analysis from classical commentaries, particularly Matthew Henry, actually provides a brilliant lens for this.
Yeah. Oh, I love Matthew Henry's take on this.
Yeah, Henry points out this really profound truth about human power. He says that no man's dignity or dominion, no matter how great the army behind him is, sets him above the law.
Wow.
So when God commands Joshua to be strong and of a good courage, he is not telling Joshua to manufacture some kind of blind bravado. He isn't telling him to, act tough or hype himself up before a battle.
It's not about adrenaline.
Exactly. True courage, the specific kind of courage required to sustain a massive, chaotic transition, must be deeply rooted in unshakable principles.
Mm-hmm.
God explicitly tells Joshua not to turn from this law to the right hand or to the left.
So it's about establishing a baseline because, if you just rely on bravado or, hype, the second your tactical plan fails or the enemy surprises you, you panic.
Right, because it was built on an illusion of control.
Yes, your courage just evaporates. But if your courage is rooted in a core principle, you don't veer off course when the chaos hits.
Matthew Henry actually notes that true prosperity, and what the ancient text calls good success, they don't simply spring from clever battlefield tactics. They emerge from a rigorous, unyielding alignment with foundational truths.
That makes a lot of sense.
Joshua was suddenly a man of immense, almost dictatorial power over this huge nation. But he had to be reminded immediately that he was still a man under command. He had to observe to do according to all that was written. It is an intellectual, moral, and spiritual grounding that absolutely must precede any physical action.
Because without that grounding, power just corrupts the mission.
Right.
And fear shatters the army.
Precisely.
It makes you think about how we handle the massive, intimidating transitions in our own lives today, because we all face moments when the Moses of our life is suddenly gone.
Oh, absolutely.
It could be a mentor who guided your career for a decade and then just suddenly retires. Or maybe a parent passes away and boom, suddenly you are the patriarch or matriarch of a fractured family. Or it could just be a previous era of your own life, like a marriage or a long-term job or a community that just abruptly ends.
And suddenly you are the one holding the wheel.
You are staring at your own raging Jordan River. And in those moments of crisis, everyone around you will clamor for a tactical plan. They want to know your next 10 steps. But this ancient text suggests that before you make a single move, you have to ask yourself, what is the foundational principle I am meditating on?
What's your baseline?
Exactly. What is the core truth that is going to keep my compass straight when the pressure hits? We need that bedrock principle so we don't veer into panic on the left or, arrogance on the right.
And what's really fascinating is that Joshua internalizes this immediately.
Yeah.
He doesn't just sit in his tent reading the scrolls and avoiding reality. He takes that principle-rooted courage and translates it into immediate, daring action. Which brings us right into the events of chapter 2.
Yes, the spies.
Right. Joshua knows he needs intelligence on the first major obstacle in his path, which is the fortress city of Jericho. So he secretly dispatches 2 spies across the river to view the land.
And their espionage mission immediately plunges us into one of the most unexpected and honestly complex narratives in the entire text.
That's an incredible story.
So these 2 spies, they managed to sneak inside the massive fortified walls of Jericho. And out of all the places in a bustling ancient city, they end up finding shelter in the house of a woman named Rahab. And Rahab is not like a city official. She's not a sympathetic noblewoman. She is a harlot.
An absolute outsider.
Right. And her house is physically built right into the town wall itself, which makes it a strategic location, but also a highly visible one. So it doesn't take long for the king of Jericho to get word that Israeli spies have infiltrated his city, and all the intelligence points straight to Rahab's house.
So the authorities show up.
The king sends his guards to demand that she turn the men over. And here, Rahab makes a choice that literally changes history. She actively defies her king. She takes these 2 Israelite men and hides them up on her flat roof, burying them under stalks of flax that she had laid out in the sun to dry.
Which is a great detail.
And when the king's guards arrive at her door, she looks them in the eye and feeds them a completely fabricated story. She tells them, "Yes, men came to me, but I didn't know where they were from, and right before the city gates shut at dark, they left. If you hurry, you can probably catch them." And she sends these heavily armed guards on a wild goose chase all the way toward the fords of the Jordan River.
That detail about the flax on the roof, it's such a brilliant glimpse into ancient domestic life, and it really highlights her sheer ingenuity. Albert Barnes, in his commentary, notes that flax in ancient Palestine was a very substantial plant.
Oh, really? Like, how big?
It grew to more than 3 feet in height, and the stalks were as thick as a cane. Yeah. After harvesting, these thick carded fibers had to be laid out in the sun to dry before they could be spun into linen.
Huh.
So she essentially had a miniature forest of thick, drying vegetation right on her roof. It provided a perfect, natural, unsuspicious hiding spot. It wasn't magic, you know. It was her quick thinking and intense resourcefulness in a split-second moment of extreme danger.
I love that tactile detail of the 3-foot stalks. You can just imagine the spies lying perfectly still under this heavy, damp vegetation, listening to the king's guards interrogating her just a few feet below them.
Terrifying.
But okay, we have to stop here and address the elephant in the room, because this story presents a massive hurdle for a lot of people reading this text today.
Ethical issue.
Yes, Rahab flat out lies to the authorities. She commits high treason against her own city and her own people. She operates on the absolute margins of polite society, making her living in a deeply stigmatized way, and she engages in active, premeditated deception.
She breaks all the rules.
She breaks all of them. Yet not only does this ancient text present her as a definitive hero, but centuries later, the New Testament writers completely elevate her. Both the book of Hebrews and the book of James hold Rahab up as a paragon of faith, placing her alongside figures like Abraham.
Yeah, it's a huge contrast.
How do we reconcile that? How does a text that is so deeply concerned with the book of the law praise a woman who is breaking the rules of morality and state loyalty?
It's a vital tension to explore, for sure. And it really requires us to approach ancient narratives with a high degree of nuance. We kind of have to separate the messy, desperate reality of human survival from the enduring spiritual truth the text is trying to highlight.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, the classic commentators are very careful here. They note that her falsehood, the direct lie she told the king's guards, was born of human frailty and the extreme, terrifying pressure of ancient siege warfare. Morally, the text doesn't explicitly endorse the act of lying as a virtue in itself. The lie is a symptom of a broken, violent world.
Right, she's in survival mode.
Exactly. However, what the text is unequivocally praising, what elevates her to a hero of the faith, is her profound, perspective-shifting clarity. Think about the geopolitical context of Jericho at this exact moment. The king, the military leaders, the nobles, the entirety of Canaan's establishment. They were terrified, but they were defiant.
They were clinging to their power.
They were doubling down on their doom, trusting in their massive stone walls. But Rahab, a marginalized woman whom society had pushed to the absolute edges, literally living on the wall, was the only one who saw through the political noise. She recognized a truth that completely transcended her city's propaganda.
The declaration she makes on the roof.
Yes. When she goes up to the roof to speak to the hidden spies, she makes an incredible theological declaration. She says, "The Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath."
She saw the reality that the kings were just too proud to admit, and what she reveals to the spies next is game-changing intelligence. She tells them that the entire population of Canaan is paralyzed. She says their hearts did melt and no man had any courage left.
And the reason why is fascinating.
It's wild. They had heard about the miracle of the Red Sea. Now, remember the timeline here. The parting of the Red Sea happened 40 years prior.
4 decades.
For 4 decades, this entire region has been living in dread of a people they haven't even seen yet. They also heard the recent news of what Israel did to 2 opposing kings, Sihon and Og, on the other side of the river. So the entire city of Jericho is suffocating in fear, but only Rahab has the strategic foresight to act on it.
She seizes the moment.
Right. She doesn't just passively hope to survive. She brokers a hard-nosed deal. She essentially says, "Look, I just risked my life to save you from the king. Now swear to me that when your army comes, you will save me and my family."
A completely transactional, brilliant move.
And the spies agree to the terms. They promise our life for yours. But they stipulate a highly specific condition. When the invasion happens, she has to gather her entire family inside her house. She must keep absolutely silent about their business, and she must bind a specific scarlet thread in her window so the invading army knows exactly which house to spare.
That visual of the scarlet thread is incredibly potent. Barnes points out in his notes that this scarlet cord was likely spun of threads dyed deeply with cochineal.
What is that?
It's an ancient, vivid crimson dye extracted from insects. So against the dull gray and brown stones of the city wall, a vibrant cochineal red cord would catch the eye of an invading soldier instantly. It was a perfect tactical marker.
So practical.
Very. But on a deeper theological level, commentators draw a striking parallel between this scarlet thread and the blood of the Passover lamb from the book of Exodus.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, just as the Israelites painted blood on their doorposts to signal the angel of death to pass over their homes in Egypt, this scarlet thread hangs in Rahab's window as a symbol of grace and ultimate protection amidst impending destruction. It is a powerful emblem that salvation and inclusion in this new community is being extended to an absolute outsider.
You know, it totally flips our assumptions about where wisdom comes from. We have this really ingrained habit of expecting salvation or the big breakthrough or the brilliant new strategy to come from respectable sources, you know?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
We want the credentials.
Right. We look to the credentialed expert, the flawless leader, the perfectly polished presentation. But Rahab's story proves that those operating on the margins, the people society or corporate culture or our own families might just dismiss or overlook, they often possess the clearest vision.
Because they aren't invested in the status quo.
Exactly. They aren't blinded by the illusion of the status quo because the status quo has never actually served them. They see the cracks in the wall long before the king does. And I think it challenges us to look around our own lives and ask, who are the unexpected allies we're ignoring?
That's a great question.
Are we actually listening to the voices on the edges of our organizations, or are we only taking advice from the people sitting comfortably in the boardroom? And then, on a personal level, Rahab's story forces us to define our own scarlet cord.
Right, the boundary.
Yeah, when the pressure of life becomes overwhelming, what is the non-negotiable boundary, the clear agreement or principle you have secured that protects your peace of mind and your household? She didn't leave her survival up to chance. She demanded a clear, visible covenant.
It is a profound shift from being a victim of circumstance to being an active participant in your own deliverance. And the intelligence she provides, the knowledge that the enemy's heart is melted, is exactly what Joshua needs to hear.
The green light.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The spies manage to escape, descending from her window by that very cord, and they hide in the mountains for 3 days before crossing back over the Jordan to deliver their report. When Joshua hears that the land is already psychologically defeated, he doesn't hesitate. He orders the entire camp of Israel to break their wilderness camp and move directly to the banks of the Jordan River.
But then reality hits.
Right. Because as they stand on the edge, the physical world asserts itself violently. Chapter 3 opens not with a smooth transition, but with an insurmountable roaring obstacle.
And it is so important to visualize this clearly, because this is not some gentle, babbling brook they're looking at. The text specifically notes that it is harvest time.
Which changes everything.
It really does. In the ancient Near East, the spring harvest coincides with the massive melting of snow on Mount Hermon and the Lebanon Mountains to the north. Millions of gallons of icy water surge southward, turning the normally manageable Jordan River into a raging, terrifying flood.
It completely overflows all its banks.
Tearing up trees, carrying debris. To attempt to cross this with an army would be suicide. To attempt it with a civilian population, including the elderly, children, and livestock, is absolute madness.
Yeah, it's physically impossible.
Yet, standing before this chaotic force of nature, Joshua doesn't call for boat builders. He tells the people to sanctify themselves, to purify themselves, promising them that tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And then the logistical strategy he rolls out is incredibly strange.
Very specific and very strange.
He commands the priests to take up the Ark of the Covenant, which is the sacred, gold-plated chest containing the 10 Commandments, representing the literal presence of God on earth. The Ark is ordered to go first, leading the march. But Joshua issues a strict command to the people. They are not allowed to crowd around it. They must maintain a precise gap of 2,000 cubits between the Ark and the front line of the people.
And just to give us a sense of modern scale, 2,000 ancient cubits translates to roughly 3,000 feet, which is a little over half a mile.
Wow.
That is a massive expanse of empty space between the leadership symbol and the people following it.
Wait, I'm stuck on that detail. A half-mile gap. If you are a terrified civilian staring at a flooded river, wouldn't you want the ultimate symbol of God's protection right next to you?
You'd think so.
Wouldn't a half-mile gap disconnect the people from their leadership? Is this about fear? Like, is the ark considered so dangerously holy, so volatile, that they needed to maintain a half-mile blast radius to keep from being struck down?
That's a very natural assumption, honestly. And the commentators do acknowledge that an element of deep, trembling reverence is certainly at play here. The ark was not something to be treated casually. However, the primary reason given within the text itself is surprisingly, profoundly practical.
Practical how?
Well, Joshua tells the people they must keep this distance, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way heretofore. We have to think about the sheer logistics of moving a population estimated to be well over 1 million people.
Right, it's a massive crowd.
Massive. If the ark were positioned right at the front lines, mixed in with the vanguard of the crowd, only the first few rows of people would ever be able to see it. It would be entirely lost in a sea of bodies.
Oh, of course.
By placing it half a mile ahead, creating this massive, untouchable buffer zone, the ark becomes an elevated, unmistakable focal point. The entire multitude, stretching back for miles across the plains of Moab, could look ahead, over the heads of the crowds, and fix their eyes on their guiding principle. As they prepare to walk into what Matthew Henry describes as the valley of the shadow of death, this brilliant logistical move ensures that not a single person loses sight of their true leader.
It's brilliant crowd psychology. When you are going somewhere you have never been before, you need an unobstructed line of sight to your anchor.
Exactly.
And then we witness what I can only really describe as the physics of faith, because the priests shoulder the heavy wooden poles of the ark, and they begin the half-mile walk down toward the raging river. The entire nation is watching. But the waters do not perform a preemptive miracle. The river does not part while the priests are standing safely on the dry bank.
No, it doesn't. And the text is painstakingly explicit about the sequence of these events. The priests have to physically carry the ark down the bank and step into the rushing floodwater.
They have to wade in.
Right. The scripture says that it was only when the feet of the priests that bore the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, then the waters coming down from above stood and rose up upon a heap, very far away, near a city called Adam.
So it happens upstream.
Way upstream. The supply of water from the north was miraculously halted, piling up into a massive, invisible dam, while the water south of that point simply drained away toward the Dead Sea. The riverbed dried up completely, allowing the hundreds of thousands of Israelites to cross over right against the fortress of Jericho. But none of that happened until the priests took that first terrifying step into a flooded, chaotic river while carrying a heavy golden chest.
Action precedes the miracle. They had to get their feet wet. The water didn't part to invite them in. It parted because they committed to walking through it.
It's a huge test.
And the psychological resonance of this for us today is just staggering. Think about how human nature operates, especially when we are facing a massive risk. We always want the path to completely clear before we commit our weight to it.
Oh, absolutely. We demand a guarantee.
We demand a guarantee from the universe. We want the lucrative new job offer officially signed and in our inbox before we finally quit the toxic job that is destroying our mental health. We want the deep, agonizing conflict to be entirely resolved in our minds before we even initiate the difficult conversation. We want the creative breakthrough absolutely guaranteed before we sit down at the blank canvas and risk making something terrible.
It's so true. We want it perfectly safe.
We stand on the dry bank of our lives, staring at the rushing water of our ambitions or our fears, just praying for the river to dry up so we can walk across safely. But this ancient narrative argues that the mechanism of breakthrough doesn't work that way. Sometimes the waters refuse to part until you commit your weight to the river.
It is the physical, undeniable manifestation of trust. Belief is what you hold in your head on the dry bank. Faith is what happens when your sandal hits the freezing water.
Wow, yes. It forces a mirror up to our own hesitation. You have to ask yourself, what is the flooded river you are currently standing in front of, demanding a guarantee before you move? What does it actually look like for you to dip your feet in the brim today?
It might be something small.
Right. It might not be quitting your job today, but maybe it's updating the resume. It might not be resolving the marriage today, but maybe it's booking the counselor. It's about taking the small, terrifying, but necessary physical action that proves to yourself and to the world that you are entirely committed to crossing over to the other side.
And this commitment requires a profound fundamental shift in mindset. But what fascinates me is what happens next. You would logically assume that once the people finally cross this dry riverbed, the immediate focus would pivot entirely to military tactics.
Get ready for war.
Exactly. They have just crossed into hostile enemy territory. Jericho is looming right in front of them. The adrenaline must be surging. But instead of drawing swords, we find this deeply strange intermission. This leads us directly into the events of chapter 4, which is entirely concerned with the architecture of memory.
Okay, this part is fascinating.
As the people are flooding across this miraculously dry riverbed, God hits the pause button on the entire invasion. He gives Joshua a very specific, labor-intensive, and seemingly pointless task.
Exactly. You'd think the ultimate goal is just to get every single man, woman, and child across that riverbed as fast as humanly possible before the invisible dam up north breaks and the water comes crashing back down on them.
The water's piling up higher by the minute.
Right. But God says, stop. He orders Joshua to call forward 12 men, one representing each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Interestingly, the text notes these men were actually chosen beforehand, so this was a premeditated plan. Joshua orders these 12 men to walk back into the deepest middle part of the riverbed.
Right to where the priests are.
They are told to go right to the exact spot where the priests are standing firm, holding the Ark of the Covenant. And each man is instructed to bend down and pick up a massive stone from the river floor. A stone so large and heavy that the text says he has to carry it out on his shoulder.
These are boulders, basically.
They are commanded to carry these 12 massive stones completely out of the river and bring them to their first lodging place on the other side, a place called Gilgal, to serve as a permanent memorial. But wait, this is where it gets genuinely perplexing.
The second set of stones.
Yes. Joshua also sets up 12 other stones right there, in the very middle of the Jordan River, in the exact spot the priest's feet were standing before the waters return.
Yeah, a careful reading of the text reveals two distinct sets of stones. 12 stones carried out to Gilgal, and 12 stones erected in the middle of the riverbed. Meanwhile, the crossing itself is completed in absolute haste. The text highlights that 40,000 fully armed men from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh lead the vanguard, ready for battle.
They are not messing around.
Not at all. And true to the physics of the miracle we discussed earlier, the moment the entire nation is safe, Joshua commands the priests to come up out of the Jordan. As soon as the soles of the priests' feet touch the dry land on the Canaan side, the suspended waters of the Jordan violently return to their place, instantly overflowing all its banks just exactly as it had before. The door behind them is slammed shut.
The psychological finality of that water crashing back down must have been terrifying. There is no going back now.
None.
But I have to question the underlying logic of these two sets of stones. I mean, I understand the monument in the camp at Gilgal. That makes perfect pedagogical sense. It's visible, it's a public plaza, you can walk up to it and point to it. But why on earth would Joshua take the time to build a monument of 12 heavy stones inside a deep riverbed, knowing full well that within hours, the rushing, muddy water of the harvest flood is just going to cover it up entirely?
It seems like a waste of time.
What is the functional point of a monument that nobody can see?
It's a brilliant question, and delving into the analysis of the classic commentaries on this reveals a deeply profound understanding of the dual nature of human memory. The visible stones at Gilgal, as you noted, are for the community. They're public, pedagogical, and designed for future generations to interact with.
The public memory.
Right. But those hidden stones in the river, they serve as a localized, deep foundation of truth. They mark the exact point of ultimate danger. The very nadir of the riverbed, where the presence of God held back the chaos of nature. Even if those stones were only visible years later, during a severe drought when the water was incredibly low, or perhaps they just created a strange, unnatural ripple on the surface of the rushing water that a local boatman might notice, they represented a truth that was foundational precisely because it was submerged.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It permanently encoded the cultural memory of their miraculous survival into the very landscape that had threatened to destroy them. It was a private anchor for Joshua, knowing that beneath the terrifying surface of the river, the evidence of their deliverance remained unshakable.
It's the ancient practice of building physical architecture to encode cultural memory, because human beings are incredibly dangerously prone to amnesia.
We forget so quickly.
We do. The text actually states the purpose of this explicitly. Joshua gathers the people and says, "When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What mean these stones?' then ye shall let your children know." And he instructs them to recount the story of the dry riverbed, explicitly connecting it backward to the crossing of the Red Sea 40 years prior. He is forcing them to connect the dots of their own history.
And this highlights a critical comparative insight into the human condition. We are incredibly forgetful creatures, especially regarding our own past successes, our resilience, and the times we were miraculously delivered from absolute disaster. When we hit the next crisis in our lives, our default mechanism is to completely forget that we survived the last flood.
We just panic.
We panic, we despair, and we act as if we have never been saved before. God, understanding this flaw in human nature intimately, knows that the Israelites are about to face terrifying, brutal battles in Canaan. The walls of Jericho are just the beginning. They will need a tangible physical reminder that the God who stopped the raging Jordan River is the exact same God who is fighting for them now. The stones are an antidote to future panic.
Which asks a direct, challenging question of us, really. How quickly do you forget your own resilience? Think about your life right now. When the next major crisis hits, whether it's a massive restructuring at work, a terrifying health scare in your family, or a sudden financial collapse, do you instantly forget the impossible things you've already survived in your past?
Usually, yes.
Right. Do you immediately revert to thinking this current obstacle is the one that will finally destroy you? The ancient wisdom here suggests that we cannot rely on our internal memory alone. We need architecture. We need our own personal memorial stone.
We need physical proof.
Exactly. How do you document your breakthroughs? When you survive a season of intense anxiety or pull off a project you thought was destined to fail, do you just breathe a sigh of relief and move on, or do you encode the memory? Maybe it is a deeply honest journal entry you can read when the panic returns. Maybe it is a saved folder of emails from a time you succeeded against all odds. Maybe it is a specific physical keepsake sitting on your desk.
Just something to anchor you.
You must build something tangible so that when the next generation of your family, or honestly, just your own future self in a 3:00 a.m. moment of panic asks, how did we ever get through this? You have a concrete, undeniable artifact to point to. You need proof that you can survive the flood.
And they're going to need that deeply anchored memory almost immediately, because what happens next defies all conventional military and human logic.
Oh, this part is wild.
It really is. This brings us to the profound events recorded in the first 12 verses of Joshua chapter 5. Let's set the stage again. The people are now safely across the river. The text reiterates a crucial piece of intelligence. All the kings of the Amorites and all the kings of the Canaanites have heard the news that the Jordan River dried up for the Israelites. The text says their heart melted, neither was their spirit in them anymore.
He's utterly demoralized.
Completely.
Yeah.
Now, from a purely strategic military perspective, this is the golden hour. This is the precise moment to sound the trumpets and attack. Strike while the enemy is completely paralyzed by terror and confusion.
But they do the exact opposite. And this is an incredible obstacle to our modern understanding of efficiency and strategy. Instead of marching on Jericho, God commands Joshua to make flint knives and perform the rite of circumcision on all the males of the nation at a location they subsequently name the Hill of the Foreskins.
To understand the why behind this seemingly bizarre command, we have to look closely at the historical context detailed in the text. The generation of Israelite men that originally came out of Egypt with Moses was fully circumcised. It was the physical mark of the covenant with God.
Right.
But because of their catastrophic rebellion at Kadesh, where they panicked at the reports of giants in Canaan and refused to enter the land, they were sentenced to wander the wilderness for 40 years until that entire rebellious generation died out. During those 40 long years of wandering in the desert, the entire new generation of boys that was born was not circumcised.
So they grew up without the mark of the covenant.
Yeah, exactly. The commentaries debate the exact theological reasoning for this suspension. Some suggest it was simply the impracticality of constant travel, but the more profound theological consensus is that it was a visible sign that the covenant was temporarily suspended. The nation was under a form of divine discipline due to their father's disobedience. But now, the 40 years are officially over. The punishment is complete. They have crossed the Jordan. The promise is finally being fulfilled, and the covenant must be physically renewed before they can inherit the land.
Okay, I understand the deep theological necessity of renewing the covenant. I grasp the symbolism, but I still have to express absolute jaw-dropping disbelief at the tactical absurdity of doing this right now.
It seems like the worst possible timing.
It's insane. You have just successfully invaded highly hostile territory. You are physically camped on the plains of Jericho within striking distance of a fortified enemy city that has a standing army, and your very first strategic move is to intentionally physically incapacitate your entire fighting force.
You disable everyone.
You render every single male capable of holding a sword bedridden, feverish, and in agonizing pain for days. If the king of Jericho had realized what was happening, he could have marched his army out and slaughtered the Israelites and their tents, exactly like Simeon and Levi did to the men of Shechem in the book of Genesis. From a human perspective, this sounds like strategic suicide.
It absolutely does, and that tension is the entire point. The expert analysis from commentators like Matthew Henry unpacks the profound theological reasoning behind this extreme vulnerability. God is unequivocally demonstrating to Joshua, to the Israelite army, and ultimately to the terrified Canaanites watching from the walls that this campaign will not be won by standard military strategy.
It's not about being clever.
Not at all. It will not be won by human strength or by shrewdly capitalizing on tactical advantages. It requires absolute, radical vulnerability. By willingly disabling themselves in the very face of their enemy, the Israelites are forced to rely entirely, 100%, on divine protection. It is the ultimate, terrifying test of faith. They are laying down their swords and trusting that the God who stopped the river will also stop the Canaanite army from attacking while they heal.
That is profound.
Furthermore, God tells Joshua a beautiful phrase after this is completed. He says, "This day have I rolled away the reproach of Egypt from off you."
And that explains the name of their camp, Gilgal, which sounds like the Hebrew word for roll.
Precisely. It was not just a physical surgery, it was a psychological and spiritual removal of the shame, the taunts, and the degraded identity of their past bondage in Egypt. They were no longer the wandering, disgraced children of slaves. They were the fully restored covenant people of God, proudly taking possession of their inheritance.
And right after this profound moment of healing and identity restoration, another massive, earth-shattering shift happens. The core wisdom of this chapter isn't just the radical vulnerability of the circumcision, it's what happens a few days later.
The food changes.
Yes. They heal, and then they celebrate the Passover, the feast remembering their deliverance from Egypt. And the very next day, the text says they eat the old corn of the land and parched grain of Canaan, and suddenly, without warning, the manna ceases.
Yeah. The text is very stark, almost abrupt about it.
Yeah.
And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore.
We have to pause and feel the weight of that. The manna wasn't just food. It was a daily, miraculous bread from heaven that literally sustained millions of people every single morning for 40 years in a barren, lifeless desert. It was the ultimate safety net. It was undeniable proof of God's care.
They never had to work for it.
Never. And one morning, they wake up, they look out of their tents, and the ground is just bare dirt. The miracle is permanently gone. The psychological shock of that must have been intense. It probably felt like abandonment. Imagine relying on a literal daily miracle for your entire existence and suddenly being told, the miracle is over, now you have to farm.
That's a rough morning.
But exploring the mechanism behind this reveals that it is actually the ultimate sign of maturation. Extraordinary, miraculous provision, the manna, is meant for the wilderness. It is meant for the seasons when you are utterly helpless and incapable of saving yourself. But taking responsibility, working the hard dirt, planting seeds, harvesting, and eating the normal produce of the earth, that is the reality of the Promised Land.
It is the necessary, painful shift from childlike dependence to mature partnership. The wilderness was a nursery. Canaan is a proving ground.
Which brings us to a deeply challenging reflection for anyone listening today. Are you currently mourning the loss of a manna phase in your own life? We all go through seasons of manna. Maybe it was a period in your 20s where opportunities just seemed to fall into your lap miraculously. Maybe it was a season where you had an incredible mentor covering your every single move, fixing your mistakes before anyone noticed, providing for you professionally. Or maybe it was a job that was easy, lucrative, and required absolutely no personal growth.
And then it just stops.
And now suddenly, that easy provision has stopped. The mentor left. The market shifted. The safety net vanished. It is so easy to feel abandoned by the universe, to feel angry that the ground is bare. But how can you reframe that painful loss? What if the ceasing of the manna is not a punishment, but a promotion?
A promotion to maturity.
Yes. It is an invitation to embrace eating the corn of the land, the hard-earned, mature fruits of your own effort, your own sweat, and your own responsibility. It's time to grow up, pick up a plow, and partner with the reality you are in.
And growing up, taking that mature responsibility means facing the brutal reality of the battles that are still ahead. Healing from the past and eating the fruit of the land is wonderful, but the massive stone walls of Jericho are still standing right in front of them.
They still have to fight.
Exactly.
Sure.
Which requires a completely different understanding of who is really in charge of this impossible mission. This creates the perfect transition into the theological climax of this entire section, found at the very end of Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15.
The encounter.
The encounter. The army is healing at the camp in Gilgal. The manna is permanently gone, and we find Joshua out alone near the city of Jericho. He's likely scouting these massive fortified walls, weighing the sheer impossibility of breaching them without any siege equipment, and carrying the immense, crushing burden of leadership on his shoulders.
You can just picture the tension, the desert wind, the looming shadows of the watchtowers, and suddenly Joshua looks up and he sees a man standing right across from him with a sword drawn in his hand. Now, we talked extensively about Joshua's courage back in chapter 1, how it was rooted in the law. Here we see the physical manifestation of that courage in action.
He doesn't flinch.
Joshua doesn't run away. He doesn't panic and call for his bodyguards. He steps right up to this armed, imposing, mysterious figure, a display of immense bravery, and he asks the most human, instinctual question a military commander could possibly ask. Art thou for us or for our adversaries?
Are you on my side or their side? It is the ultimate binary question. It is the lens through which human beings view absolutely every conflict, us versus them.
But the figure's response shatters that binary completely. He answers with a single devastating word. Nay. Or no. He says, nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come.
He refuses the premise entirely.
He completely rejects the premise of Joshua's question. And the moment he says this, Joshua's reaction is immediate. He doesn't argue. He falls flat on his face to the earth. He worships. And he asks, what saith my Lord unto his servant? The captain then tells Joshua to take his shoe off his foot, for the ground he is standing on is holy. And the text simply notes that Joshua obeyed.
We need to unpack the theology of this encounter deeply, because it reframes the entire book. Classic commentators like Matthew Henry and Albert Barnes spend a great deal of time analyzing the identity of this figure. They identify him not just as a random angelic messenger or a spiritual soldier, but as a direct divine manifestation.
Really? Not just an angel.
Specifically, Christian theology identifies this figure as the pre-incarnate Word, a physical manifestation of God himself before the incarnation of Christ. The evidence for this is in Joshua's reaction and the commander's acceptance of it. Throughout the biblical text, when humans try to worship angels, the angels immediately stop them and say, stand up, I am just a servant like you.
But this commander doesn't say that.
Exactly. He accepts Joshua's worship. Furthermore, he commands Joshua to remove his sandals because the ground is holy, which is the exact verbatim language God used when speaking to Moses from the burning bush. Joshua is standing face to face with the divine.
And that divine identity makes the commander's answer no. So incredibly brilliant. Think about what Joshua is trying to do here. He is the leader of the chosen people. He assumes he has the moral high ground. He's trying to pull God into his own earthly tribal conflict. God, are you with the Israelites or the Canaanites?
And the captain completely refuses to be reduced to a partisan ally.
Yes. He is essentially telling Joshua, I am not here to take sides in your human conflict. I am here to take over. God is not a mascot for Joshua's army. Joshua is merely a lieutenant in God's army.
This would present a profound, enduring philosophical warning that cuts across all centuries and cultures. The ancient text is, of course, portraying a specific historical moment of divinely mandated warfare to establish Israel and Canaan. But the enduring wisdom we must extract from this encounter is the destruction of human arrogance in the face of ultimate truth.
So humbling.
We have this desperate, arrogant assumption that truth, or God, or the moral high ground, functions simply as a mascot for our personal agendas. We do it in our political factions. We do it in our corporate strategies. We do it in our theological debates. We are constantly looking at the sky and asking, is God on our side?
Yes. We see a drawn sword, and our only concern is whether it is pointed at our enemies. Think about how we handle our modern conflicts, whether it's a bitter, massive political divide in the culture, a cutthroat boardroom battle for control of a company, or just an agonizing, entrenched argument with a spouse in the kitchen.
We just want to win.
We become completely obsessed with getting validation. We want the universe or morality or the counselor or the referee to declare unequivocally that we are right and they are wrong. We want the commander to join our ranks and fight for our ego. But the paradigm shift this ancient text offers is devastating to our pride. The real question is never, is the highest truth on my side? The real question is, am I aligning myself with what is ultimately right? We don't get to ask the commander of the universe to join our little human factions. We must fall on our faces, take off our shoes, and ask how we can surrender to his command.
It is the difference between recruitment and surrender. When you are facing an impossible obstacle, trying to recruit God to bless your preconceived plans will always result in a no. Surrendering your plans to the highest truth is the only way forward.
And that provides the ultimate mechanism for how we should approach the Jerichos in our own lives. The next time you find yourself locked in a heated conflict, or you are staring down an insurmountable obstacle and you feel that deep, anxious instinct welling up inside you to ask, how can I get validation for my side? Who is going to prove to everyone that I am right? You have to catch yourself.
Stop right there.
Stop. Mentally take off your sandals, recognize the gravity of the moment, and ask a fundamentally different question. What does the highest truth require of me right now? How can I strip away my ego, my tribal allegiance, my desperate need to be right, and simply align my actions with what is fundamentally morally required of me in this exact moment?
Because it is only when you stop trying to recruit truth to be your mascot and instead completely surrender to it, that the massive, terrifying walls of your own personal Jericho finally have a chance to come down.
It changes absolutely everything about how we perceive the battlefields of our lives, which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over as we conclude this deep dive into the ancient world of Joshua. Think back to that exact moment when Joshua was told to take off his sandals because the ground he was standing on was holy.
It's a striking image.
Remember exactly where he was physically standing. He wasn't in a pristine, beautiful temple. He wasn't back in the safety of the wilderness tabernacle surrounded by the priests. He was standing alone in hostile enemy territory, staring up at the unbreached, terrifying, shadow-casting wall of Jericho, right on the precipice of a brutal, terrifying reality. And yet, that specific patch of dirt was declared holy ground.
The hardest place became the holiest place.
It forces us to ask a radical question about our own lives. What if the most difficult, hostile, impossible obstacle you are facing right now, the terrifying medical diagnosis, the irreparably broken relationship, the crushing career failure, is not actually a wasteland? What if that exact place of deep fear and overwhelming odds is actually holy ground, simply waiting for you to recognize who is standing in front of you and what is being required of you?
That is a powerful thought to leave on.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.